let's start with, and we'll circle back to all of that, with, what's your story, man? Like, you and I have known each other for probably nearly a decade now.
Yep.
And, we're both family men. We both got large families, lots of kids, and, healthy marriages. One of the questions I get all the time when people find out I have 8 children, they're always like, well, did their moms get along? I'm like, well, you'd have to ask her.
Yeah, you just got to ask one baby mama. We'll
Yeah.
see. Oh, by the way, I'm still married to her. Yeah,
Yeah,
no, I get that.
it's the same person. Or if I'm out with like 3 or 4 of my kids and they're like, oh, you have your hands full. And I was like, actually, today's a light day. I only got half of them.
Yeah.
But like, tell me a little bit about your story, and we're gonna dive into. You have a very unique experience in that you spent some time in a federal prison, and I really want to talk about what that experience was like and what you learned from that, and oddly enough, what was good about it,
Sure.
and maybe what wasn't as good.
Yeah.
And for those of you that maybe are listening and have read my book, a little bit of Gabe's story is in that book, because I really have a tremendous amount of admiration for this man, and have been able to witness his journey. And I have seen very few people go through the level of sort of tribulation that Gabe has gone through with as positive of an attitude and with as stellar a perspective of accountability. And so I'm super excited to have you on the season 2 finale.
Oh
Man,
man.
like, you are the gold standard of accountability in my circle, my friend.
I appreciate that. Those are kind words. And to kind of answer your question, I'm 44 years old, family man, been married to my wife. We're going to celebrate this week, actually, in 2 days, 22 years of marriage.
Fantastic. I love it.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got 6 beautiful children that range from 18 years old down to 8 years old, and they're all still at the house. Bigger family than some and smaller family than others, but it works for us and we love it, man. It's a special kind of crazy is what I always say.
That's it. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. And people, when they find out that I went to prison, a lot of times they're just like, tell me that, what's up with that? And in a quick summation is, back when I was in my young 20s, I started learning how to buy and sell real estate. And I learned it from a gentleman who then became my partner eventually. We partnered together with a couple other guys, and we started buying and selling real estate together. We did it very non-traditionally. A lot of times we would do it, it's like the no money down, owner financing, lease to own. There's a lot of different names for it, but we would work specifically with for sale by owner type of listings and properties. And eventually we were very successful at it. And eventually we started branching out and working with realtors on listed properties. So more of a traditional approach. And with that, there's a couple things. You deal with individuals that have big egos, and that are the professionals. So when you come in and you do things differently, it rocks the boat. And there was some realtors that we worked with, particularly their brokers, who said, hey, we don't like how you're structuring those deals. And so they had friends in the bureaucratic what's the word? Individual. Man, I can't think of the word right offhand. That's one of the side effects of prison, to be quite frank with you. You eat so badly and the nutrition is so horrible that you just literally, we just call it prison stupid. You forget things.
Wow.
And so anyways, these are, they started talking to some of the bureaucracies in the state that basically oversaw how business is done in the particular real estate niche. And I don't feel like we were doing anything illegal, but nevertheless, it caused a lot of investigation into our business, which then led to my partner being prosecuted. And there's a big, long story about that, but I won't bore you or your listeners with all the details. I specifically structured a real estate transaction, and I structured it in a way where I didn't think was breaking the law, but I obviously went to jury over it. I felt like the prosecution wanted me to testify falsely against my former partner in their prosecution against him. He's a very good friend of mine, and he's also a family man. And I don't know if he broke the law, and I don't think he broke the law. I certainly don't think he did anything on purpose.
Right.
Whether he did or not, they were asking me to, in my opinion, provide false testimony against him, and I wouldn't do that. And they kept ratcheting up pressure on me to do so. So I just said, look, I'll go to trial over any of the charges that you want for me. And that was a very naive type of viewpoint. I thought what's right is right, what's wrong is wrong, and the truth will prevail and justice will have its day. And when you go up against the federal prosecution, they have unlimited budget, unlimited power, and unlimited time to do anything that you want. And almost always, all of the federal judges are former federal prosecutors. So in my opinion, it's a very incestuous type of relationship, if you will, right? Like it
Yeah.
just feeds each other. And I learned really quickly that you don't try to fight the federal government. You certainly don't try to fight the federal government if you think you're going to win. And I don't want that to come out as I'm trying to obfuscate my responsibility, because I made wrong choices
Yeah.
in
No,
how I structured this transaction.
yeah, and we've
Yeah.
talked about this quite a bit, and you've always said to me, and not to put words in your mouth, but my perception of your attitude toward the whole situation has always been, I've done what they said I've done, and I didn't understand that it was illegal or that it wasn't right. And you know, you and I have had conversations around it, and it's I mean, honestly, I mean, I don't know how you are able to have that conversation without cursing and throwing things, because like my understanding of it, just from being an outsider and not even being like a close family there all the time, just the conversations you and I have had, incestuous is a polite way to put it, because there's layers and conversations that happen behind closed doors. There's no oversight. Like, I mean, and in the legal system, it is almost so heavy. We have this founding document that says we're innocent until proven guilty, but oh my gosh, is the actual, what's the word I'm looking for? The way that the system is actually ran is quite the opposite.
Yeah,
And
absolutely. But we're indoctrinated. I call it propaganda. God bless America, land of the home of the land of the free and home of the brave. We have the best justice system in the whole entire world. And look, I think that that is true to a large degree. I love this country. I love the freedoms, liberties, and abilities that we have here. But at the same time, there is a propaganda machine that continuously creates the belief that it's perfect, that it can't change or shouldn't change. And that's just not the case. There are gaping holes, huge gaping holes. And the farther we get removed from the actual foundation and the foundational principles of this country, the worse it becomes. And so, there's just huge problems. There's huge inequities. I saw them firsthand. But you know, you know, going back to the story, it's look. I did what they said I did, but in the legal world, we have two sides. You have a defense and you have a prosecution, and it's adversarial, it's combative. That's the way it was designed. And so you on the defense, you create a narrative. And the same thing is on the prosecution, you create a narrative. So you can take, again, any set of actions and you can create a story around the intention of what those actions are. And your job as the prosecutor and as the defense is to convince a jury of your story being more accurate.
Yeah.
And that's just kind of the way it goes. And so I was convicted of willful failure to file taxes, which was a misdemeanor. And then I was convicted of felony counts 1 and 2 of wire fraud, which means I defrauded a bank with the story and the documentation and the disclosures that I made to them. And I did it in order to make money on the transaction. I did it all knowingly, and I knew that I was going to default on it. And then I took those illegal gotten gains from my fraud, and I took those funds and I put them through my business account and then transferred them to a different business account. Bang, here comes money laundering, just to cap it off, right? And again, I bought the house, I structured it similar to how they presented, but not for any of the reasons or
Yeah.
intentions why
And
they said it,
it's almost
right?
impossible.
Their narrative won in court.
Yeah, and it's almost impossible to prove what you were thinking or what your intention, like how, like to prove intention. And it makes me think of other high profile cases that we've seen through the media with politicians where they've even said we're not going to prosecute because we don't believe the intention was there. And it's like, well, but they did the illegal thing. They did the thing. They did the thing, but you're deciding not to move forward because you don't feel like the intention was there. And like in your case, it's very much, well, we think you intended to do it for ill-gotten gains. And how do you prove that? How is
Yeah,
that anyone can?
our whole entire justice system is built on top of this principle of intent. It really is. The unfortunate, what happens is if you know people or you have enough money to hire people who know people, then people are informed of your intent. And, or even if you go to trial, you are paying through the nose for somebody who is going to fight to convince the jury of your narrative, right? Which is there was no intent to do what they're accusing me of. And if you are not super wealthy and have the ability to pay minimum multiple six figures into the seven figures for an attorney that will represent your best interest, if you're not fortunate enough to be that wealthy, you will not win. You just won't.
Yeah.
Right? Whether it's your money or whether it's crowdsourced and funded, and like some of these high profile cases I think that you're mentioning, right? They have a lot of support in the media and then in society. And so there's contribution that's given to their legal defense. And without that, they would be in prison for sometimes forever.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah. It's mind-boggling to me the way the system works. And I have a lot of people that I've spoken with who, for lack of a better word, and I mean no disrespect, but they've bought the propaganda, right? They believe that justice will prevail, and in spite of all of the mounting evidence that isn't the case, right? Or the understanding that all's fair under the scales of Lady Justice. It's like, I mean, if that were the case, there wouldn't be organizations like the Innocence Project that are fighting dozens of battles simultaneously to help free men and women who are wrongly convicted. It's like, well, I don't understand, but it's that propaganda machine. It's that, look, and I'll be honest, I mean, there was a time in my own history where, I had a brush with the law and I felt, you know, uh, like maybe I got the short end of the stick, or maybe, things were a little dicey, but not to the scale that you've experienced. And so for me, like since I was 18, 19, when I was first introduced to the legal system, and what I mean, as a young man, I was told straight up, these are the two options. You have no way out because you have no money, and that's it. And I was like, well, wait a minute.
Wait, let me guess what those two options are. You either go to trial and go to prison for a long time, or you deal.
Yep, that was it. That was it.
That's it.
And
That's how our legal system works. And that is
yeah,
unfortunate. That is the biggest thing, in my opinion. That is the biggest thing that needs to change in order to actually create justice. You cannot get forced into, like, so many people, they do deal. And then in the federal system, like, state is different. The federal system has then mandatory minimum sentencing guidelines.
yeah,
So they beat you over the head with these two huge clubs. So, like, go to trial and lose, and we're going to impose, because you made us go to trial, we're going to impose such harsh guidelines, right? So you're looking at 30 years,
yeah,
right? Or 20 years. Your life is over at that point.
yeah.
Okay.
It really is.
Or they say, or come in and deal. And if you deal, you number one, you're agreeing that you did this, right? You're
Mhm.
admitting it. You're signing a document that said that you did. You're also forfeiting any ability in the future to go back and say, no, I didn't do that. You cannot come back after that and say, no, I was forced to sign that. It's all written out in
Yeah.
this document,
Yeah.
in this plea
What's
agreement that
crazy
you
is
do.
a lot of times, at least in my experience and others I've spoken with, there's a timetable, right? You have X amount of days, you have X amount of weeks. And unless you've been involved in that system, your frame of reference, your ability to make an educated decision is non-existent.
Zero, non-existent. I
And,
agree.
and the time it takes to get educated enough. I mean, I used to think felons were bad people. Like
That's right.
growing up, like we're raised, like it's part of that propaganda, right? If you're a felon, if that person's a felon, oh my God, they're horrible. They have done just the most awful thing. And I have multiple multiple friends who, now that I'm pushing 50, I can look at and go, man, these are some of the best people I know who have either made honest mistakes or made a mistake that maybe they knew they were bending the rules or breaking the law. And like to your point, it almost becomes this game of like, if you don't play, we're gonna twist the screws so it hurts more,
Mhm.
versus like, we have these mandatory minimums, mandatory maximums, and it's like, but we don't have anything that says, if I do 60 miles in a 55, I pay $100. It's like, I just go to see the judge and he decides it's 350 because I didn't wear a nice enough tie, or
Mhm.
it's like, it's this arbitrary thing with no oversight. And that's the thing that drives me insane. And my understanding from your situation is that you had some prosecutorial misconduct, or some things that happened that maybe could fall into that. And there's no one to talk to. There's no one to go to and say, hey, this isn't happening the way that I'm guaranteed, right? And even if they said, yes, he shouldn't have done that, all of a sudden the rules don't apply to them. They don't get punished. There's no discipline. You,
There's
you become a
there's
difficult person.
very little. That's right. There's very little accountability on the prosecution side. They can say what they want. They can do what they want. They might get slapped on the wrist by the judge every once in a while, but it again, they all come from generally the same side of the aisle, which is the
Yeah.
prosecution. And so they use the law and their policy and their procedures as basically a cudgel, right? They can smack you around with it and you can't really do anything. And then when you say, hey, that's wrong, there literally is no recourse.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, we could talk all about that. I don't want it to sound like I'm like a crybaby about the situation, but I would 100% agree. Most people just think that everything is amazing. And the only reason why you're a felon is because you were doing something wrong. If you weren't doing something wrong, you wouldn't have ever been in that situation in the first
Right.
place. And that is just not true. It
Yeah.
is not true, man. And it's becoming more and more apparent in our society. If you're on the wrong side of the person that wields the stick, right? This whole cancel culture thing,
Yeah.
they have friends, or they can be the person that then wields that stick legally against you.
Yeah.
And I always also say this: everything is always legal until the day it's not, because you can pass a law like that,
It's,
and what was
well,
legal and what was,
yeah.
commonplace is now illegal. And if you keep doing it, and a lot of times, a lot of those laws, when they change, are retroactive. So you can go backwards on it. I'll give you an opposite example, right? You guys are out there in the state of Colorado. Most country, or most states around the country, are now legalizing recreational use cannabis. And
Yeah.
if not, like, some of the derivatives, right? Look, I had some of the best guys that I ever knew in prison. They were in prison for a mandatory minimum 10 to 20 years for marijuana.
Yeah.
One of my best buddies, his fiance had cancer. She wound up dying, but he started growing specifically for her. Did it legally, had the cards for it and everything else. Now, he grew a little bit extra and he started selling some.
Mhm.
But at the same time, it's and this is in Oregon. It's a Oregon, man. So
Yeah.
he gets a mandatory minimum 10 years because he pled guilty. He didn't go to trial. He pled guilty and still had to serve for 10 years
Yeah.
for what is completely legal now.
Yeah.
Completely. He would
Well, and
never get
that's
prosecuted for it.
it's. eh, I mean, mandatory minimums is something that I struggle to understand because it creates this environment where we look at things through this lens of black and white, and in my experience, nothing is black and white. Like maybe two things in my world are like
Right.
black and white, right? And I there's so much gray that if you without context, without all of these things, and it leads into sort of what we were talking about kind of before we started, is this whole concept of grace. Like I can't lean into restoration and grace for my fellow human without some context, without some
Mhm.
understanding of why. My wife's dying of cancer and I sold a little extra, probably because I have a ton of medical bills or I'm trying to pad, I'm doing whatever. Like I look at that and I go, okay, do me a favor. Let's not do that. That's probably not a really great idea. But the way that the justice system looks or works with these mandatory minimums is insane to me because it's the same way we actually approach education in this country, right? Everything's black and white. There's a box you fit into this one or that one or this one. Um, but I'm curious to it raises a question for me in your experience of the people that you were in prison with. There's that old joke, everybody's innocent, but I'm
Sure.
curious from your lens, from your viewpoint, like what's a realistic percentage of people that not whether they did it or not because that the court decided, but like that probably don't really belong there for as
Yeah.
long, or like what
This
does that look like?
this is a nuanced question and a nuanced answer as well, because I got sentenced to 6.5 years of federal prison, and you have security level as far as what you're sentenced to, depending on your crime. And my crime was white collar. It hurt, like physically hurt absolutely nobody, and it actually physically hurt no person as well. It was a bank was my victim.
Victim. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. And so I guess I say that I was surrounded with people that are very, very low level, um, and also most of them nonviolent, right? Some of them had been convicted of violent crimes and they started at a higher level security, but they were able to work their way down the prison system into this minimum security camp. Like there was no fences around where I was. We could literally walk away. There's consequences to that, and especially when the federal marshals come and pick you up and charge you with additional escape charges. But like, in my opinion, we need a justice system and we need a prison system, because there are people out there that are just bad people and they do bad, bad things to people. And so I'm not the person that says defund the police and we shouldn't have prisons and the justice system. No, no, no. Civil society demands those things. But at the same time, this is one of the worst parts about prison, or at least my experience, because while you, when, whether you did things on purpose or whether you did things on accident that still broke the law and required a punishment like that, there was no rehabilitation.
Yeah.
Literally, it is a joke. If anybody thinks that you can go to prison and get an education and come out a better person than when you came in, that is a fantasy land dream. That is, in my opinion, beyond ludicrous to think that, because unless you do it of your own accord, there is nothing in the prison system that will teach you to
Yeah.
be a better person. Nothing. They
Yeah.
have classes, they have programs, but all of it is a farce. I mean, a farce. Most of it to justify paychecks of staff, number one. And number two, to justify hustles of inmates in order to hustle you out of goods, money, etc. Right? Like the people that are in charge of the educational system on the inmate side, they create all of the classes, and then you can either go and take them, and they don't count for anything, just to have your case manager not hassle you. But there's nothing real there. But at the same time, if I just want to keep my case manager off my back, I can just pay the person that's teaching the class to give me credit. I'm done. That's what I'm saying. It is a farce that there's
Yeah.
anything beneficial, and things that could actually be done to help. Like, for instance, here's a real concrete one. We have um, uh, certainly a transportation and logistics nightmare happening in this country right now, right? The supply chain is like broken. But a lot of people will say we don't have enough truck drivers. I don't think that's the case, but let's just say that was the case. Look, I worked on a complex and we provided basically slave labor to 3 other prisons that were on our same facility. And we had the ability to drive around. We had the ability to walk around. There was a shop, there was a warehouse, there was a power plant, there was recycle. We had about 15 different semi trucks on that property. It doesn't take that long in order to get your CDL license and to have that
Yeah.
proctored by somebody in the prison system. I don't know how many times I made that suggestion, but it was never followed up on. People could literally get their CDL license and come out after a 3 to 10 year stint in prison and have a job that they could be making $75,000 to $150,000 a year doing. But no, they don't offer any type of concrete solutions like that.
Yeah.
Like there's no rehab, I guess,
Yeah.
is probably my biggest gripe.
Well, it's interesting to me because the intent, because I would agree with you, right? Like in a civilized society, we need to have consequences to our actions. We need to be held accountable. And I believe that that's important. You and I are both fathers. I have children. I love my children. And when they step out of bounds or they do things that they shouldn't do, there's discipline, there's consequences,
Mhm.
right? And sometimes that discipline is a restriction of television or video games or whatever. And sometimes it is manual labor. You need to go clean up the dog poop, or you need to go take care of this or that. And the intent behind that is for them to have time to reflect on what they've done, think through better solutions. And then there's typically, some counseling that goes with that. Let's talk about what happened. Let's talk about how you could do it differently. And that's the point of teaching different behavior, right? Because we're not ever going to be able to restore or rehabilitate if we aren't taking that step. And I'm fascinated by the way that the system works because it seems to be, one, very profit driven.
Mhm.
Two, you mentioned the slave labor. I didn't even have to bring it up. That there's just so much being done with little in return, and that's actually like dehumanizing. I think it actually like psychologically creates the opposite of what we're trying to do in rehabilitation. It's almost an abusive relationship. And I mean, I'm curious if your experience, you had ever had a chance to talk to anyone about that and what their point of view, or if you've studied, because I know how when you got out early, so you were only there 4 years, is that right?
I was, yep, there 4 years, and then I was
Okay.
released because of COVID. I had met all of the qualifications and had been compliant with everything and didn't get in trouble. I was a good boy,
Yeah,
that
so
type of thing.
when you were there, like you read something like 65, 70, 150. How many books did you read in the
About
four?
315 books.
Okay, so 315 books in the course of 4 years. I would venture to say that 100% you came out smarter, better to some degree, right? But like
Mhm.
you mentioned, you got to take that on your own, because I'm sure you had, colleagues that read 5 books in the same 4 years that you, or
Or
read
none.
nothing.
It's like a frat party to some people. They go there and it's like they get tattoos, they smoke and drink. I mean, there's drugs, there's contraband, there's anything that you want, you can get, right?
Yeah.
But they literally just walked around stoned out of their mind, falling down on the ground, partying like it's a fantastic time. And I could never wrap my head around that. But yeah, they never worked, they never studied. They never read. They didn't do anything to improve their life. And those are the same exact people. Again, there's no rehabilitation. So those
Yeah.
are the exact same people that will go out, do the same things that they were doing, thinking that they're smarter because they now have more contacts, and the recidivism rate on individuals like that is just astronomically
Yeah.
huge.
And I would imagine that most of them come out with a chip on their shoulder because they're pissed about spending the last 2, 5, 8 years under somebody's thumb. And one of the
Mhm.
things that you said to me early on, um, was that you every day had to choose whether or not you were going to get bitter or get better.
Mhm.
Like I've thought about that a lot, because yeah, I just think human nature is like the first month, cool. 6 months, cool. 3 years and 4 months into it, how are you still choosing to get better after experiencing and seeing? Because I don't want to be all negative and like dump all this negativity. Like I really want to talk a little bit about how did you get through that with a positive mindset? Because
Yeah.
I really, really struggle to understand how a man or a person can go through that experience and come out not wanting to, you know, just burn it all down.
Yeah. That's an interesting question, man. And there's a little bit of that in me, right? Like, F it all, burn it all down. I'm glad I'm seeing all this chaos, right? But that's like a really small portion. So how do you avoid that? Um, and how do you become better? Right. Number one, it's a conscious choice. Number two, you come to a point of non-resistance, right? Like, there's nothing I can do right now in this situation to affect change outside of me. So I will focus on making a change inside of me, because that I have control over. It doesn't matter what my situation or my circumstances are. I have the ability to control my emotions. my mental state, and my physical state. And so you, um, a couple different things. You get into a routine. You, like, I wanted to get into good shape. I have since gotten out of good shape, but I got into really good shape. Um, I had the ability to walk and think. Um, I had the ability to really talk with people. Like out here in the world, we get really busy with things that clutter our lives, specifically technology. If there's downtime, we can fill it with something, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Browsing, looking, entertaining ourselves. And
yeah,
so there you have to be really still. Um, and so like you go walk around for 4 hours a day and have real conversations with people. Like
yeah,
there's it's a different type of society and environment at that rate. And so you just take a look at, wow, I'm glad I don't have a phone right now. I'm glad I'm not tethered to that. I'm glad, I could read 4 hours a day and take a nap for an hour a day and go walk for another 4 hours a day. Like you reorder how that is. But I think at the very end of the day, um, you really just have to sink into a very spiritual place, and ground yourself there. And no matter what your thing is, that's what you got to ground yourself in. For me, I'm Christian, and I believe in the atonement of Jesus Christ, and that he already paid for and suffered and already redeemed me from the stupid things that I'm going to do, that I've done and that I'm going to do, right? Like I really believe that, but I like have to really focus and center myself there. And like I would do walking meditations. I had like a little MP3 player, and I downloaded like a couple of meditations, and they were chakra centering meditations that I did when I was walking around the track, listening to it. And then after that, I'd keep my earphones in because that was kind of a signal to everybody else, like, no, I don't want
leave
to
you
talk
alone.
to you, leave me alone.
Yep.
And so I would just keep that in, and I would just, after centering myself, it was beautiful to walk around the track and just talk with God. Like, because there was time to do that.
Yeah,
It wasn't busy, busy, busy all the time. There was annoyances, but it wasn't busy, busy, busy. And so you can really like, there's a vacuum that's going to be there. So I decided what I was going to do to fill it up. And I filled it up with that type of thing. And like, honestly, I just never really felt closer to God than I did while I was there.
interesting.
And it is super. I think about it all the time, Keith. Like
Yeah,
I really do.
it's
I'm like,
fascinating
why
because
is that?
there's there's a lot of wisdom in that, and recognizing, and I talk a lot about stoicism and stoic philosophy because the core tenet of that is control what you can control and let the
Mhm.
rest unfold, right? And I can't think of a more practical application of that than being imprisoned
Oh yeah.
and having your level of control reduced to essentially probably the most finite that it will be in your lifetime. And the ability to hone in on that, and the two things that I love that you mentioned that I think apply to even those of us that haven't experienced that in our day-to-day life is routine
Mhm.
and a connection to source. Like as a Christian as well as a Jesus follower, my beliefs are aligned with yours, and so I look at that as like, you know nothing that I'm going to experience is the same as the passion, as being whipped and beaten within an inch of your life and crucified for doing nothing wrong. Like,
Mhm.
like at least I can look at my life and go, oh, I probably deserve it. Right. And the thing that you didn't mention that I think comes out of that is a sense of gratitude that is probably hard to find. Um, and I heard this phrase last week, and I think it applies to your experience. Um, and it's from my pastor who said, gratitude begins where entitlement ends.
Mhm.
And I think that there's a lot of truth in that. And I think that the entitlement piece also sort of could be um, swapped with accountability, because I think
Mhm.
the fact that you're able to say, well, I did these things. I didn't know these would be the consequences. I didn't know that this was the letter of the law, or however somebody wants to interpret this. But you never fought against that. You never felt entitled to something else, right? And
Right.
I think there's a huge piece of wisdom in that we can apply today. You know, my wife left town. I'm a single dad for the next 3 days. I got all kinds of things I could bitch and moan about,
Mhm.
but I'm not entitled to anything. And the fact that I have these little humans in my home right now who love me and are begging me to take them out to dinner or to go do stuff with them, like, I have nothing to complain about.
Yeah. We lose sight of that too fast in our society, especially. I think in other societies where there's not nearly as much affluence, it's much easier to stay in a place of gratitude. I know I lived in Brazil for 2 years and I served and worked as a missionary among some of the greatest levels of poverty that I've ever seen and experienced. I know there's worse, but and they were some of the happiest people. They were some of the happiest people. And not only that, they're some of the most generous people. They didn't have much, but what they had, they would freely give food. I mean, like literally offering clothes off their back type of thing.
Yeah.
And, we live in a very materialistic, consumer driven, keeping up with the Joneses type of society in the United States and in most, like, let's say, first world countries, right?
Sure.
And that becomes the idols that we worship and we chase after them. And when all of that is stripped away, all of it is stripped away, man, when you go diving into the trash can because you see a pair of shoes that look like they might fit you and are probably in better shape than the ones that you have, man, it changes your perspective. Like,
100%.
yeah, we have foot lockers and I made shelving out of boxes that I grabbed out of the trash. And I thought, man, I feel like a king right now. I'm able to organize my stuff and keep it there where it's easily gotten to, and I know where it's at. Like, it's something that created a sense of
Order.
control and order. That's right. And so again, it's like,
And
if
a sense of ownership, right? Like, it's mine. I did this.
yep, I did this absolutely.
Yeah.
And so you like when you strip away all of the things that we normally have, and you get down to just kind of like necessities, it becomes a really interesting experiment to say, like, it is much easier to express and have gratitude for
Yeah.
those things.
Yeah. I can only imagine. I haven't had that experience. And I know your time is limited. Um, so I want to ask, I kind of want to dive into one last little piece.
Mhm.
I mean, we could talk for hours, and
Sure,
we'll
sure.
probably have to do this again. Um, but I want to ask, because the other part of this, and a lot of the conversations I do are for my own selfish pleasure, because I want to be able to ask questions, and
You got it.
everyone else gets to just listen in. Um,
Yep, that's the privilege of being the host.
right, right. The transition in coming home. So, like, I'm getting emotional because, I'm fortunate enough to live close to where you were um located.
Mhm.
I almost said stationed, which isn't the right
No,
right word.
incarcerated,
Incarcerated.
incarcerated. Yep.
Um, I'm close enough to live. I'm lucky enough to live close. I was able to come see you a few times, but your wife, who would come visit often, we got to spend a lot of time with her,
Yep.
and
And the kiddos too. They
and
appreciated it.
yeah, oh, it was so good to see them and to be able to have kids that could brighten them up and
Mhm.
make it um good. And the weekend that your wife got to come get you and you had been released, she came to our house on the way to let us know you were coming home. I'm not a member of your family.
Mhm.
And I was gutted that you got to come. Like, I was so ecstatically happy for your kids and for your wife. And then all of a sudden I got hit with like, man, what is that going to be like? Like, to have your world flipped upside down in the first place and then spend 4 years adjusting and adapting. I mean, we haven't even talked about like the psychological framework that this or that you require or the psychological impact that it has. But like, what was that transition like for you? Because I was a hot mess for 2 days thinking
Mhm.
about you coming home.
Yeah.
Can't even imagine how that was for you and your kids.
Yeah, it's interesting. So, um, I'd say, what was that like and what has that been like? Shocking and difficult is probably the two words that I would use. But and here's why. Because it's like you feel so appreciative for this miracle that happens in your life. Like,
Yeah.
man, I prayed for that every single day. Please just let me get home to my wife and kids. Please just let me get home to the, if it can be sooner, I will, like, thy will be done. But if it can be sooner, please, please,
Right.
please,
That
right?
will be good.
Like,
And
absolutely. And then it happens. And it's like, holy crap, that just happened. And so there's an immense gratitude, but shock. And then on the flip side to that, so you come home and we posted up a couple of videos of we surprised our younger kids. They didn't know that I was coming home,
yeah.
and like it was beautiful. I mean, like my little boy who was 6. No, he was 7 when I came home. Yeah, he was 7 when I came home. So like he couldn't believe it. He was looking around going, what's going on?
Yeah.
And we after the, really emotional reconnection and everything, we were just sitting down in our living room, and I was on the on a chair, and he came over and sat in my lap, and he just laid against my chest. And he would pull back from me and he'd look at my face, and he poked my rib, right? And I'm like, what are you doing, buddy? Like, but I didn't say anything. And so he'd snuggle me for a little bit more, and he pulled back and he poked my rib again. Like after the third or fourth time I looked at him, I'm like, what's going on, bud? Like, what's that about? And he says, uh, Daddy, is this a dream? And I said, what? He goes, yeah, is this a dream? I said, no, this is real. He goes, yeah, I know. Because in my dreams, when I snuggle you, my hand goes through your body and I can't
Oh,
feel you, but I can feel you now and I know it's real. And I'm like, holy cow, that was so like impactful to me. I
heavy,
think
man.
about that all the time.
Yeah.
And so, like, there's that beauty that comes with it. And then life starts to happen, right? It's my wife and I are 4 years separated. She was
Yeah.
doing a single mother thing of 6 kids, and I was doing, the thing over here. Like literally, their life went on and my life paused.
Yeah.
And then I try to reintegrate back in, and like every single one of my kids, they're totally different human beings at this point.
Yeah.
And so it's I just look at it as like a really big ship. Just make really slow, big turns.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so that's where I'm like, why do you guys do it like that? But then I think, why are you judging? That's
Yeah.
cool. That's just how it's done.
Yeah.
So
Well,
let's
especially
do
having
that together.
older teenagers, like you said. So you've been home now for what, 18 months, give or
Um,
take?
May of 2000, I got home.
Okay.
So
Yeah. Just
however long
about.
that is. Yep. About a year
Yeah.
and a half.
So, and you have an 18-year-old. So she's,
Mhm.
you know, 16 when you come home.
Mhm.
And most 16-year-old girls don't want to hear what dad's got to say about anything,
Yeah.
let alone a dad who's not been, you know, around, like I just think of all the different age groups and all the different things, and how tricky that's got to be, which kind of circles back to, for me, to the lack of rehabilitation. Like there's no, hey, here's how you're going to transition home, here's, because especially like in a COVID situation where it's like the rules are changing every day. And
Mhm.
so, you were able to actually benefit. It's one of the silver linings of this whole thing, is that you were able to obtain your freedom when many people feel like they've completely lost it. And I kind of look at it and go, look, you don't know what losing your freedom is. If you got to wear a mask, wear a mask. It's much different than having to be incarcerated, and be pulled away from your family. It's all perspective. Um,
Yep.
and so what's next for you? What's on the horizon for you? Because you were released, you had a little bit of a home, like house arrest or a home program.
Yep, they call it home confinement or community confinement. I'm confined inside of my home. I still have an ankle monitor on right now, still going through this process until late January when I'm done with my uh, prison sentence. And then the next step is I move on to probation. Don't know exactly what that's going to look like, but kind of looked into it and talked with a couple folks. And you know what, whatever it looks like, it will look like, and we'll do the thing. Um, and it will be a higher level of freedom and liberty, but there will still be things that I have to comply with, and still be people who I have to report to at some level, and so we'll just figure it out, and whatever it is, I'm super grateful, right?
Yeah.
Like whatever it is, I'm just super grateful for it. um, what I look for is, uh, I always told guys, like, you'd sit around and commiserate, right? Or sit around and dream. And it's like, what are you going to do when you get home? Like, what? And some guys like, oh yeah, I'm going to crush it in business and I'm going to become a millionaire and, live this life and whatever. I'm like, yeah, cool. If that's your dream, go for it. Like, I got no judgment against that. I always told them, I just want to go home so I can watch my kids play sports. If I can watch them play football, basketball, and soccer, I'm happy, man. And so, what is it? I don't know, because I've sort of, there has been a high level of restriction still with
Yeah.
the supervision that I've gone through, and it hasn't felt really safe to dream and to pursue. I have been very compliant, right? And check the boxes, and I'm where I'm supposed to be, when I'm supposed to be, doing what I'm supposed to be doing.
Is
And so when I go to probation, I don't know, I'll ask my probation officer, can I start a business? Can I do this? Can I do that? And whatever.
Do you think that that's part of how, I'm curious, because there's this Buddhist um concept, I guess I'll say, that I think is accurate, and I don't know that it only applies to Buddhism, but essentially that all suffering comes from unmet expectation.
Mhm.
And so, do you think that lack of feeling free to dream is one of the ways that you keep from getting bitter? Like
Uh, yeah,
not setting an
yeah.
expectation so you can't be disappointed?
Yeah, coping mechanism for sure.
Yeah.
um, you had asked, so answering your question right now, you had also asked a question a while back, like how did you deal with it and stay positive? And there's guys that, I mean, like, you kind of get assigned your people. So when there was a guy that came in from Utah, generally they would send him to me and say, hey, here's another guy from Utah, like take care of him, type of thing. So you hang with your people, and within the first couple of days, they're wide-eyed, like, what the crap's going on? You take them aside and you go walk around the track for a couple hours with them. You'd explain to them how prison works. It's different than normal
Yeah.
society, man. Like, do this,
Here are
don't
the
do
rules.
this. That's right. Here's the rules. So, one of the biggest things is they would tell me their story and complain, and then this happened and then that happened, and I, most of the time, it was expected. I'd let them talk, and then about halfway through it, I kind of like, hey man, they're like, yeah, I'm like, it's a cool story. And I don't want you to think that I'm not interested, but I'm not interested. Like, I'm interested in you, but I'm not interested in your story. And at the end of the day, you have to get real apathetic about the injustices, about what goes on around here. Like, apathy, you got to get good at apathy. And I'd
Mhm.
say that's the answer. You have to be apathetic about the things that you can't change, and really focus on what you can. And yeah, that is a coping mechanism,
Yeah.
because you can't just be apathetic about life. Just be apathetic about the things that you can't change. And here's the other thing, like, what this whole situation does makes you really, really empathetic to other people's ish, because we
Yeah.
all go through it. And instead of casting judgment, because I don't want judgment, because I'm a felon,
Yeah.
and I feel it, and so I know what that feels like. And so, like, I don't care if you are, right, like, in prison. I don't care if you're stealing food from the chow hall. I don't care if you're hustling this. I don't care if you are doing whatever, right? Like we might not hang out with each other, but like,
Right.
there's three businesses. This is Byron Katie, right?
Yeah.
There's my
Love.
business, there's your business, and there's God's business.
Yep.
And I got no business in your business or God's business, right?
Yep.
I mean, like,
No,
I
it's
focus on my business.
it's one of the best high level concepts out there, and it's so simple that
Mm-hmm.
it's but it's so true, and man, I feel like it's a good place to wrap up.
Mm.
I know when we set this thing up, we had some time constraints,
Yeah.
and there's so many things I wanted to talk about we didn't get to.
Let,
Um,
let, let's do episode number 2
you know,
sometime in the future. If that's valuable
yeah,
to you and your
it
listeners,
is.
I'd be happy to do it, man.
I mean, you know, there's just so many different things from other experiences you had, because we didn't talk about dogs, we didn't talk about you having someone
Mm-hmm.
die in your arms, we didn't talk
Mm-hmm.
about you teaching guys math who didn't give a crap. Like there's so many things that we didn't dive into, and then even just reintegrating into your back into quote unquote normal life, because like you said, like there's still so many restrictions, and the idea of apathy to me is a really fascinating one, because I talk a lot about accountability, and I talk a lot about letting go of the things that you can't control,
Mm-hmm.
and like that's a very succinct way to describe. It's not that I don't care, because
Yeah.
I do care. I do care what happened to you. You're a human, and then there's this whole concept around proximity, like you said, like you just talking to people helped you through so many things. And it's like, what happens if so many, if we just spent an extra half an hour talking to people, saying,
Mm-hmm.
tell me your story, tell me where you're from, tell me what, I had the opportunity the other day at church. Um, Circumstances led me and another guy to be sitting at a table. And we had an hour between things that needed to be done, and we had the best conversation.
Yeah.
I mean, it was the best part of my week, sitting and talking to this guy, and we laughed and we shared some dissenting points of view, but just getting to know him,
Yeah.
it's like, man, I need to do that with everybody. Like, I want to sit
It,
down with everybody and do that. And so,
yeah.
yeah, we definitely need to do a part two when we can. And I just can't thank you enough for taking a little bit of time to share some of your thoughts and some of your insight, because I think it's super valuable in the space of being vulnerable. A lot of
Mm.
people don't want to say, "Hey, I'm a felon. I've done this, or I've been through this." Um, that in itself to me is brave and courageous. And then really talking about, and the system's broken. The system is a
It's
hot holy mess.
Yeah, it's a hot holy mess, but we really should do a follow-up and talk about the beautiful aspects, because there's a lot of other things. Like, I the whole system, like, you can sit and bellyache about it all you want, but some like, I guess I'll finish it up like this. I've gone to church with people in my neighborhood for years, years. And then, I go to prison for 4 years, whatever. It's very transitory. People are coming and going.
Mhm.
I know like probably some of the deepest relationships that I have and people that I know the most profoundest, if that's even a word, are people that I met there.
Yeah.
Even though I've been in a community and I church with people out here, I don't
Yeah.
know them. Like,
Yeah.
you don't take that hour in between things to really sit and talk
Yeah.
with them.
I dig
So
it. So season 3, watch out, pay attention for part 2, the beauty of being incarcerated. I think
perfect.
we definitely tackle that one, my man. I appreciate you so much, man. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yep.
And for anybody who's listening or catching this on the YouTube channel, thank you for being a part of season 2. This is the wrap up to that. We're going to take a break for the holidays. Have a awesome holiday season, and we will see you again in February.
Thanks. Much love, brother.